Today we're talking about the LUMIX S5 Mark II, and this is a beginner's guide to what makes this camera so great and some fun things you might like to do with it. There is a lot the S5 Mark II is capable of, and today we want to cover a handful of ideas to inspire you to dig deeper into the features of this camera and start capturing beautiful moments. I got asked by LUMIX Australia to make a shorter version of this video, and in the process I realized that there's a lot to cover in this remarkable little camera. So I decided to make a full-length version for myself and put it on my YouTube channel. This way, I get to say some of the things that might be too cringy for LUMIX Australia. Things like, this camera is just incredible value, and anyone looking to move to a mirrorless camera system should at least take a look at the S5 Mark II or the S9. We are going to cover the basics of switching between stills photography and video, how to capture high-resolution 96 megapixel files from its 24 megapixel full-frame sensor, tuning the inbuilt image stabilization to suit your needs, selecting autofocus modes, and setting up the custom dials to help you move quickly from one style of photography to another. We'll talk a little bit about L-mount lenses too, and even touch on creating time-lapse videos in camera. Let's begin by thinking about what kind of photography you might want to use the S5 Mark II for, and how your camera setup might change for different scenarios. Shooting birds in the outback, for example, is a very different challenge to street photography in Japan or auroras in the Arctic. But this one camera will happily switch modes between a wide range of photography and video. The S5 Mark II is also very much at home in the studio with flash gear, or for chasing very high quality landscapes for large format prints. Most people have multiple photographic interests in mind when they buy a camera, and the S5 Mark II is designed to move quickly between those interests. There are two dials on the S5 II which put you in control: the drive dial and the mode dial. The mode dial on the S5 II allows you to step directly to any of the usual stills photography priority modes. Plus there's intelligent auto and program mode, and it has two dedicated dials for video shooting. One of these is specifically for slow and quick video, where you speed up or slow down the action. Importantly, there are three custom modes on the dial as well, which we'll go into more detail on soon. These allow you to store away your preferred setup for stills or video and have them instantly recalled when you select C1, C2 or C3 on the dial. The other dial that you will want to get familiar with is the drive mode dial. This one is applicable only for stills photography, not video. This is where you can select features such as continuous burst for shooting wildlife, capturing time-lapse sequences, setting a timer delay, or activating the 96 megapixel high resolution feature that uses clever pixel shift technology to capture a series of frames and assemble a single very large raw file with superb detail. There are two continuous burst drive mode settings on the drive mode dial: burst 1, burst 2. You can use the menu to set how fast they capture burst, including a very special feature called pre-burst. We'll go into that in more detail later in the video. Two other dials are located on the top of the camera, the front dial and the rear dial, which let you change settings according to your shooting mode and camera configuration. For example, if you're shooting in the shutter priority mode, the front dial will allow you to increase or decrease the selected shutter speed. In the menu system, you have an incredible amount of control over which dials perform what function, and you can even remap them for tasks such as exposure compensation or ISO sensitivity. There are a few specific features on the S5 Mark II that might appeal to anyone who enjoys landscape photography. Firstly, there's a high resolution setting on the drive mode dial, which uses a 24 megapixel sensor to capture a 96 megapixel RAW file. This technology is very impressive and very clever. The camera takes a series of shots and makes fine adjustments to the sensor position in between each one. The series are combined in camera and we end up with a single RAW file at 96 megapixels. That's enough pixels for a very large A0 print at fine resolution. There's a bunch of settings available to fine-tune the high-res mode, including the option to capture handheld instead of using a tripod, adding a delay before the sequence to avoid camera shake, a choice of modes to account for movement in the scene, and even an option to keep all of the original frames used to build the high-res RAW file. The camera does all the hard work here. There's no need for additional assembly later on. It's a simpler story for the time-lapse feature. Switch the drive mode dial to time-lapse and instead of taking a single photo, the LUMIX S5 Mark II shutter triggers an automatic sequence of captures for you. You can configure this mode to pause between shots or capture continuously. Set how many frames to stop at or even add in a delay so that the sequence starts maybe an hour later. One nice feature is you can record each time-lapse sequence into a separate folder, which makes it easy to organize back on your computer. You can pause the time-lapse at any time you like, and when you're ready, there's even an option to build the movie file in camera if you don't want to do post-processing yourself. The same drive mode also gives you access to making stop-motion videos as well. The LUMIX S5 Mark II has several features that will appeal to bird photographers, including a pre-burst drive mode, point scope focus, animal detection autofocus, auto ISO with selectable minimum shutter speed, and shooting handheld with the benefit of 5-axis internal stabilization. The continuous burst modes can be configured to capture at a range of burst speeds, which is useful when trying to capture the exact moment for wildlife or birds. There's one special trick also in this camera called pre-burst, which lets you capture frames before you commit the shutter. When pre-burst is activated, the camera will record frames onto an internal buffer instead of your memory card, but only while you half press the shutter. And the moment you fully commit the shutter, all of those pre-burst frames are written onto your card. Pre-burst makes it possible to chase very precise moments, such as when a bird is taking off from a branch. This feature first debuted on the original G9 camera, and it's also available on the G9 Mark II and S9 bodies. The autofocus point scope setting is especially useful when trying to target your focus onto a bird that is hiding deep in the foliage. You can assign any function button on the S5 II to use this feature, such as the one located on the very front of the camera above the lens release. When you activate AF point scope, you get a magnified view of your scene with a small focus zone in the center. You can also configure this feature in the menu to use a full screen enlargement versus picture-in-picture, and to tap hold the scope mode in place. Sometimes I find birds are very patient and you can capture images at 1/200th of a second with no problem. But some birds are more active and you might want a higher shutter speed to get sharp images. I like to capture with aperture priority, but take advantage of the auto ISO feature and set the minimum shutter speed to suit my birds. For stills photography, I even remapped the video record button to instead give me direct access to select the minimum shutter speed. One of the more hidden features of the LUMIX S5 Mark II is perhaps one of the most powerful, and that's the dual native ISO. This is a great feature when shooting night photography because the higher ISO range allows you to capture in lower light with less noise in the resulting image. You can choose to select the high or low ISO range yourself, or just let the camera automatically do it for you. I've used this a lot myself in the Arctic when chasing auroras. I set my ISO at 4000 or higher when shooting at night because I know the high range will be activated for me automatically. Shooting the night sky is very satisfying on the S5 Mark II, not only because the dual ISO feature lets me push for faster exposures, but focus peaking lets me have fine control over where the lens is manually focused. I can see on screen if the focus peaking is making my stars twinkle blue instead of white. Another hidden feature for low light photography is the inbuilt image stabilization called IBIS. The LUMIX S5 Mark II offers exceptional stabilization in the camera body. Even if your lens does not have any optical stabilization, the S5 II will work hard to deliver results. This means when shooting at night in very low light, you can dramatically drop your shutter speed while still capturing handheld images. It will depend on your ability to hold the camera steady as to how slow you go, but there is a definite benefit here. There are several levels of stabilization you can select for video, while for stills there's a feature to allow for panning while keeping the vertical axis stable. That's great when chasing tuk-tuks or motos in Asia. Aside from being a superb stills photography camera, the S5 II also delivers superb video quality with a huge list of professional features. I'm going to focus mainly on photography for this video, but here's a quick preview of why the S5 II is such an exciting camera for video production. The sensor on the S5 Mark II delivers 10-bit 422 4K quality video in a wide range of recording quality settings and codecs for professional workflows. Recording modes can extend to 60 frames per second in 4K or capturing regular frame rates at 6K. Log, gamma and H.265 compression are standard, and it supports frame rates to suit PAL, NTSC or cinema projects. The important thing to know about video captures on the S5 Mark II is that you want to access them through dedicated video modes on the mode dial. These can also be saved into any of your custom mode setups as well. This lets you have the S5 II set up for everything video and then switch back to one of the photography modes for everything stills. You can do that instantly. Even when you're set up for capturing stills, it is also possible to shoot video just by hitting the big red video record button. But be aware that whatever photo style and mode you have set up for stills, these will be applied to your video settings as well. There are other videos on YouTube that go deep into the video performance of the S5 Mark II, and things like recording ProRes RAW to external monitors or the paid upgrade option to record to external SSD. Everyone has different ideas on what a good autofocus setup looks like, and it will vary with what kind of photography you're doing. Shooting honey eaters hiding in the tree branches is a very different challenge to capturing terns darting past your boat on a billabong. There is no one size to fit every situation. Some people prefer to use the rear autofocus button and disable AF from the shutter button. Some prefer a fast switching response, while others like the face detect to step in for them. There is a lot to learn when it comes to autofocus options on the S5 Mark II. For example, when human face detect is enabled, the camera will draw a yellow box around the face or body of people in the shot to let you know it has found a subject. When you half press or full press the shutter, the camera then commits a focus lock and the box turns green to let you know where the autofocus landed. You can select detection modes for humans, animals, cars, and motorcycles. Keep an eye out for firmware upgrades that expand these capabilities too. You can also deactivate the autofocus entirely and shoot manual. Many lenses have a switch to turn off autofocus, but there's also a control on the rear of the S5 II. This gives you a choice between single focus, continuous focus, and manual. The S5 II offers some excellent support to enhance the manual focus experience, such as focus peaking and the option to zoom into the display when the focus is adjusted. One of the great design features of the LUMIX cameras is the ease with which most buttons can be programmed to perform whatever function you prefer. By stepping into the menu, you can pull up a list of all the buttons and decide what you want them to do. That video record button can now be repurposed to activate the AF point scope perhaps, or jump directly to the bracketing menu, or modify the subject detection settings. You get to choose that. For any button that doesn't trigger recording or focusing, you can shortcut this process and just hold down the button for 3 seconds and the programmable options will come up on screen. This makes it very easy to experiment with advanced features. Not only can you customize the function of most dials and buttons on the S5II, but you can also save an entire camera configuration into any of the custom modes accessible on the mode dial. You know that thing when you loan your camera to your teenage son, but when it comes back, every single setting has been changed? Just roll to your pre-saved C1 setup and you're instantly ready to shoot again. No surprises. This is a seriously powerful feature on the LUMIX cameras, and I encourage anyone to give it a try. Let's say you want a custom setting for street photography. I like using aperture priority for my street photography and shooting wide open at around f2. I also like using a black and white photo style as it gives me a good feel for how light is moving through the scene. With my camera set up the way I want it, now I go into the menu and save that configuration to C1. My next setup I'm going to tune for bird photography. For that, I want a much higher minimum shutter, and instead of black and white, I want natural color profile. Also want more generous autofocus area for birds, and let's activate the animal detect as well. With all that configured, I'll now save my bird setting into C2. Now I can access either of these setups instantly just by rolling the mode dial to C1 or C2. When I do that, all my custom settings are restored to what I'd last saved. I can still change those settings and experiment a little bit, but I can quickly and easily come back to my baseline setup anytime I roll back to one of the custom dials. If I want to change an existing custom mode, that's easy too. I don't have to go back to scratch to start over, but I can simply select my C1, adjust what I want to change, and then immediately save that over the top of my existing C1. Simple. Having your own custom modes allows you to quickly respond to different situations. If you were out all night shooting stars, but the next day you want to grab a shot of a bird, the custom setup ensures that you are ready for the moment. And don't forget, you can save your favorite video or stills modes into any of the custom settings slots. C3 is a little bit special compared to C1 and C2. There's a hidden library of custom modes behind the C3 dial. You can save up to 10 setups into the C3 library and then select which of those will be linked to the C3 dial in the moment. You can have a C3 saved away for auroras, another one for bird videos, another for Zoom calls, and so on. It's very powerful. There's one final feature here that I want to share that allows you to not only save the custom modes to an SD card, but indeed your entire camera setup. The cam set file can be moved from one camera to another or shared online. This is great if you have 2 camera bodies and want identical custom setups, or if you want to download someone else's custom setup. If you Google S5 Mark II custom setup, you will be able to download the exact cam set that I use on my LUMIX S5 Mark II. All of the LUMIX S series cameras use L-mount lenses. The L-mount Alliance brings together LUMIX, Leica and Sigma to share a common standard. That means you can use L-mount lenses made by other Alliance partners on your S5 Mark II. And there are a lot of great lenses to choose from, including the convenience of high-performance zooms and the quality of very fast primes. Your choice of lens is such an important part of getting results from your camera, and often a specialist lens is required for certain kinds of photography. If you enjoy macro, for example, then the LUMIX S100 f2.8 macro is an exceptional lens when coupled with the S5 S5 Mark II. Or maybe you're more into sports photography and the 70-200 2.8 is more your style. For serious wildlife chasing, the Sigma 60-600mm is a great combination with this camera. And this is where I have a little bit of inattention between two of my favorite brands. I have been a LUMIX ambassador for many years, but more recently I also became a Sigma lens ambassador as well. I have spent a lot of money on Sigma lenses over the years, and I recognize the incredible value they offer. Their Art Series lenses should cost way more than they do. But aside from value, the other thing I love about Sigma is their innovation. They make loads of interesting lenses that nobody else makes. Their 14mm f1.4 is just an amazing bit of kit for shooting the night sky. Their 60-600mm super telephoto is simply the best wildlife lens I've ever taken for a trip through the outback. They make some gorgeous little primes in their contemporary range as well, like the 20mm f2 and the 35mm f2. And in the studio, the 35mm f1.2 and 50mm f1.2 are just gorgeous lenses. So I have a little inattention here because I love the LUMIX gear, and yes, their 50mm f1.4 is also amazing. Plus they have an entire set of lightweight f1.8 primes that use all the same 67mm thread, which is so nice for video work and when you're working with filters. I love those primes. And I have to say that the LUMIX 100mm f2.8 macro is simply the best macro lens I've ever used. Only last year I fell in love with macro all over again, but that was actually thanks to the Sigma 105 2.8 macro. And then early this year, LUMIX released theirs and it was just a little bit better. And honestly, I did not think that was even possible. That Sigma macro is so sharp, you can cut yourself just looking at it. But the autofocus on the SE100 is just so good. There is an L-mount lens for every situation. And please note that if you already own a G series camera, such as the G9 Mark II, they use the Micro Four Thirds system and not L-mount. So you cannot swap from a G9 Mark II to an S5 Mark II. I want to finish off this video by taking a closer look at three little buttons you'll find on the rear of the S5 II. The first is the LVF button located left of the viewfinder. This button controls whether the live image is sent to your rear screen or the electronic viewfinder, or whether it should switch automatically between the two by sensing when your eye is pressed next to the camera. With each press of the button, it rotates through these three modes. Sometimes you might wonder why the rear screen is totally blank, and often it's because the LVF has been pressed and only the viewfinder is getting a display. Our next control is the display button, which changes the information you receive on your rear screen only. With each press of this button, the rear screen will switch between a high information overlay of the live view or a minimal overlay of the live view, a detailed settings panel, and simply switching off the display completely. Finally, let's look at the quick menu or the Q button. This is where you can set up quick access to functions that are normally tucked away in the menu. Things like the bracketing system, photo styles, stabilizer options, Wi-Fi connections. Anything that you might want to quickly tap on screen and adjust, you can store in your own version of the quick menu. Indeed, anything you can assign to a function button on the S5 Mark II can be put into the quick menu as well. It is a great feature for anyone who likes to customize their camera to suit their exact needs. There are a lot of powerful features on the LUMIX S5 Mark II, and it's little details like the Q menu which make it possible to take better control of them. I know this has been a long video, and it is a long list of features you get with the S5 Mark II. Hopefully you've found a few new tricks to get you excited. We hope you enjoy getting out there and spending time taking great photos with this camera. Have a great day.